Spring 1916. Downton was not like it had once been. As she walked to the estate, Milo saw just how much, with ambulances and cars around at the front of the house, as the war-wounded walked, or hobbled, as they sat in the sun. It had changed. Milo could never conceive it would be. Her grandmother had been in receipt of that news from her father and also from Ernest by letter, and had told Milo this, and had smiled at the stories of her exploits. And she had had no tutor or governess. Her grandmother had insisted on teaching Milo herself, for she had been a teacher herself in Scotland before Milo's grandfather had asked her to marry him. Andrew Jameson had set up his distillery outside Dublin, and bought Daphne Castle to suit the family. Her mother had grown up there. Milo had learned. It was not like Downton at all. Rather, it would be like Downton if, say, people like her father, or Mrs. Brewer, or other business owners lived there. The bare minimum of servants. No formalities for clothes changing, unless they were entertaining Irish nobility. And though she had her reservations, more accurately, though she had tormented herself for days worrying about something she did not know or understand, Milo settled in quickly. So it had been with a few reservations in reverse that Milo had written the letter she had done with her grandmother's supervision, to Lord Grantham. Ernest was on leave and had gone back to Downton to continue with the electrical work, and she had told her grandmother she dearly wished to see him. To her astonishment, Lord Grantham had thanked her for her eloquent letter and told her that she was indeed most welcome to join Ernest, with the condition that you work with him alone, and that you return to your father at night. Milo could do that. She had learned, where she shouldn't, that her father was suffering with his health. A doctor had come and there were problems with his lungs and his breathing. So she had been somewhat apprehensive arriving back to Downton herself, having travelled to Dublin with her Aunt Clara. But she crossed to Liverpool alone with a ticket sent from Mr. Ashby, and further on via railway with other tickets, to York and then to Ripon, then finally, Downton. Now Milo, don't let it worry too much, her father had said, when she arrived back. He seemed like his usual self, Milo thought. We are to be here with Ernest when he comes from leave. But he broke off and Milo changed her thoughts. Her father had choked his words and went into a coughing fit, which ended in him clutching the shop counter while his body racked with the effort. As soon as you can speak to someone, he told Milo the next morning, waving away Lord Grantham's letter. Check where you can go, and what you can do. So it was to Downton's front door Milo came, asking, politely, as she had been taught, for an audience with the Dowager. It was a woman who came to speak to Milo, a nurse, though Milo did think she was familiar, and told Milo that the Dowager was not at home. May I wait? It seemed like a good enough question. Milo had spent some time of her 2 years in her grandmother's home listening to sayings, listening to words and the effect they had, listening to the intonation, and learning it. All of this, Milo was gradually realizing, was merely learned dialogue. And this seemed to work, for the nurse said that she could wait in the library and the Dowager Lady Grantham would be pleased to see her. You wishes to see me, young lady? The Dowager's voice, unchanged in Milo's time away, drew her attention. She bobbed, as she had been taught. I did, Milo replied. I do. Mr. Ernest Ashby is coming back to improve the wiring at Downton, and other of your buildings. To add the tenant farms. While he is coming back I have come. She bobbed again. You seem very well informed, young lady, the Dowager told her. Do I know you? Yes, your grace. No, that was for the king. Your majesty. No, the royal family again. Yes, Lady the Dowager Grantham. Mrs. Crawley. Milo tried. Though her face remained rigid, humor played at her eyes for just a fraction of a second. Your name, child? Miss me Lucina Ashby, Lady the Dowager held up her hand. Lady Grantham is sufficient, she said. Milo bobbed. Your brother is the brilliant young man my son is sponsoring in his scientific research, she continued. And you are the child who scaled down the outside wall of the Abbey, are you not? Milo. Yes, Lady Grantham. Milo acknowledged. I was a child then. I am 12 now. Oh, yes? The Dowager asked. Yes, I can see you have grown taller, and your hair is tidier. I understand your mother's family is where you were staying? It has been an age since I visited in Ireland. The Dowager glided past Milo and took a seat on one of the library chairs. And you wished to ask me, what exactly? What exactly? Milo repeated in her head. What did she want? Well, she had reasoned. As her father had dismissed Lord Grantham's acceptance of her at Downton, Milo had reasoned that he had wanted her to check with someone more important. The Dowager was the only person Milo could think of more important than Lord Grantham. She showed the Dowager her letter of permission and told her reasoning for seeing her. The Dowager had nodded, briefly, in approval. Milo assumed with hope. Things are different, your ladyship, Milo bobbed. Here at Downton, if you agree to my helping Ernest, I need to know what is different. Who, your ladyship, she bobbed again. Don't carry on like that, you look like a fairground attraction, the Dowager commented. Yes, I can see the arrangements are much different than you must remember them. Milo nodded. Well, as you know, you left a house and have returned to a hospital. The nurses and Dr. Clarkson are in charge of their treatment. We are in charge of the building. That is the only difference. She glanced at Robert's letter again. Abide by what my son tells you. Do not speak to the soldiers. Your brother accepted, of course. You may eat and drink in the servants' hall, but ensure, and this is the most important thing, Miss Ashby, ensure that no one is inconvenienced by you. She leaned towards Milo, and handed her back her letter. Can't I do that? I can, Lady Grantham, Milo agreed. But then a dark cloud of a thought crossed into Milo's sunny mind. She frowned. Ernest is not back yet. To who do I listen? The Dowager straightened up in her chair. You came to me, Miss Ashby, so you are to come to me again if you wish to have anything clarified. If it's day-to-day things, Carson and Mrs. Hughes, I will inform them. 88,888,888. Milo was allowed to find her way back down and out of Downton Abbey, and around to the servant store at the back of the house. It was different, already different. Everyone was working at jobs which were needed to keep the officers nursed, so no one was opening doors or announcing dinners. Indeed, people who had a strict hierarchical position could be seen doing any amount of tasks. Daisy was taking the newspapers, for instance, when Milo opened the servant store and trod, silently, across the kitchen floor and slipped into a chair at the far end of the kitchen table. It took a good deal of time for Milo to be noticed, and it was Mrs. Batemore who did the noticing. Who the heck are you, sitting as bold as brass at my kitchen table? Milo looked up from the small book she was reading, a poetry book by Robert Browning that her grandmother had given to her, and looked inquiringly at the cook. I am Miss Lucina Ashby, Milo told her. And behind her, she saw Thomas. Not the Thomas of her imaginings, because he was always in his livery, but Thomas in his medic army uniform. His piercing grey eyes caught hers and his face melted into a smile. Who the heck is Lucina Ashby when she's at home? Asked the frazzled Mrs. Patmore, busy with soldiers' dinners as well as their own. You're not telling me you don't recognize Milo, Mrs. Patmore? Thomas said, as he strode past her and towards Milo. An apple? He offered. Only if I am allowed, Mrs. Patmore, Milo said, primly. The Dowager Grantham, Mrs. Crawley said I may have my meals here. Mrs. Batemore stopped kneading the dough she was working on. Milo? She asked, laughing once or twice at a polite, well-mannered young lady, who had blossomed out of a handful of it away. Is it really you? Yes, Mrs. Patmore, she told her, then turned to Thomas. I am to work with my brother, in the daytime, and go home to my father at night, she told him, noticing his left hand, damaged from a gunshot, healed badly enough that he could not close it when he made to grip the back of the chair next to Milo and lower himself down. Quite right, he told her. It is not a suitable place for a young lady to be at night time. Your father was right to decide it. But, to both Mrs. Patmore's and Thomas's amazement, and to the amazement of the servants who had milled in from the scullery, Daisy, and the stores, William, Milo told of her audience with the Dowager and the permission she had gained from Lord Grantham. Well, said Mrs. Hughes, Having got the message from the Dowager of the arrangement, I never did think I would see that girl sit so silently as she is doing now. She has been with her family, Mr. Carson told her. The Jamesons are well-to-do. His lordship chooses their whiskey on occasions. They are married into the Inchilquin family of D. The O'Briens. Yes. Miss O'Brien appeared behind Mrs. Hughes. Not you, Carson dismissed, and turned around. The O'Briens of D. It is no wonder Miss Melusina has come back with manners. Miss Melusina? Mrs. Hughes questioned, suppressing a smirk. I always thought she would come right, Carson added. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. You are tall, Milo, Thomas told her, taking in her deportment and her clothing. A skirt which looked as if they were bloomers, he noticed, or rather, trousers masquerading as a skirt. It was good that someone had taken her in hand, and had been sympathetic to her character. And he was pleased to see her, surprising himself. Although, Cuckoo Milo being here implied the imminent arrival of spring Ernest, and he was longing to see his lover, and even more pleased knowing that Milo would be gone at nights. Tall? Milo asked. Is that bad? No, it's not bad, Thomas told her. Still strange with her questions, though. It's not anything. Children grow. It's good, I suppose. And Thomas Barrow found, as he showed her around the different Downton, where the hospital was and where she could and couldn't go, to Dr. Clarkson and to Lady Sybil, who was positively delighted to see Milo, that there was far less chance of his name being linked with some of the officers with similar tastes to his own. Being associated with the female Miss Ashby, the friend of the family, was very, very convenient. 88,888,888 your hand, Milo asked Thomas, as she climbed down a ladder after helping Ernest as he fitted electric lights outside in courtyard in the gas lamp fittings. He offered her his hand as she got to the last few steps and, after a couple of seconds of confusion, realized Thomas was making to help her. She held on to it, and examined his scar, and he did not pull it away. I was injured in the trenches, as we collected. Thomas broke off. Bodies, injured men, Milo finished. It's all right. You can talk to me of any of these things. I understand. You understand more than is good for you, Thomas told her, wryly. And no, not anything. He swallowed, smiled at Milo. Once, you asked me why the fox you were interested in could be one day living, making decisions, and next, in pieces, dog food. I did not say dog food, Milo told him, seriously. She looked across the lawn, where men in wheelchairs were being pushed. We were standing there. It was a summer evening. There was a Turkish gentleman. No talk at all, ever, of the Turkish gentleman, Thomas cautioned, as he walked with her to the electrical generator building. All I meant was, I understood your words. I have seen that. When they were inside, Milo looked for Ernest. When he could not be found, Milo said, we cannot be alone together in here. Thomas looked amused. My grandmother said, a man and a woman cannot be alone together. She looked around the room where she had slept for so many years. It's all right if someone is with us. If Ernest were with us. It was all that Thomas could do not to burst out laughing. Come on, then, he told her, gesturing towards the door. May I escort Miss Ashby to lunch? 88,888,888. It's outrageous. Thomas tried to keep down his voice as Ernest hushed him that night. Inside one of his technical books a white feather floated, drifting down from the pages, oscillating, Ernest might say, until it whisked to the floor. You will go to Lord Grantham, Thomas insisted. You've been there. You've fought in the trenches. It's not as if you never fought. For a few months, Ernest conceded. Until I was called back to Cambridge. Either you take it, or I will. I mean it, Ernest, Thomas told his lover. Ernest gave him a solemn look. When Thomas called him Ernest in that tone, he knew he was deadly serious. It is an outrage. Lord Grantham fumed, as he took the feather from Ernest's hand and deposited it into the fire. I understand, Lord Grantham, if you no longer wish me to work at Downton. If my sponsorship is to end, Ernest bowed his head, I can say that, with all my heart, I have never Balderdash, Lord Grantham declared, making both men alert. And look at him. I say, Balderdash, someone in this house has gone to the trouble of doing this. It's the look of the thing, Ernest elaborated. Sadly, it will take me a day to get my things together. Explain some of the technical care that will be needed to. Are you resigning? Lord Grantham interrupted. No, your lordship. Ernest looked confused. A white feather, given as an accusation of cowardice, tarnished not only the recipient but their family, their colleagues, their patrons. Then kindly remain at Downton. Continue with the work you are doing. Is there anything you would like me to do, your lordship? A prompt from his butler gave Lord Grantham a moment to focus. First, I will call the family. I cannot believe that any of them would do this, however it must be said. I will then speak to Dr. Clarkson and in front of the officers. While it is their hospital, it is my home. And then, he looked to Carson, I will come downstairs to speak to the staff myself. Lord Grantham shook his head. This is unacceptable and I will not tolerate such behavior under my roof. Very good, your lordship, Carson acknowledged. Might I suggest that Mr. Ashby leave Downton today until you have? No, Carson, you may not suggest it. Lord Grantham turned to Ernest again. Mr. Ashby is exempted for his Cambridge work, and part of that involves his work here. He was summoned to return and is continuing to work on my commission as part of that. As if that, he flung his hand to the now ashen feather, never happened. 88,888,888. Everything had begun well. Immediately as Ernest arrived, he had wanted her to help him. She was allowed everywhere he was, and they had got through the wiring and generating the electricity needed for all the lights to be on at full capacity. Mr. Bates was prison. She had learned, through a long speech by Anna, that he wasn't meant to be there. At least, everyone thought so. Although all said he had not murdered his wife, Milo, though she agreed with Lord Grantham, could not square it with his behavior towards her. He had made her life unhappy. Milo made her way to the chauffeur's cottage. It was next to have its gas lamps removed and electricity put into its place. She was about to go in, but hesitated. If Tom Branson was there, she would not be able to look at the cars. And then she saw the nurse she had seen earlier cross the courtyard and over to the chauffeur's cottage. So, he wasn't in the garage then, Milo thought, and then realized that the nurse who had invited her inside the day before had been Lady Sybil. Perhaps they were married. It was fine to be in the company of a married man, Mary Jameson had told her. So Lady Sybil can be alone with a man? What was it her grandmother said? It was wrong. Hello. Tom Branson called when he arrived in the garage later, to find Milo altering the depth screws in the engine of the Ford. Did you fit it like this? Milo asked, not turning around to look. I did. And you are going to leave it like that? Yes. Branson concluded, stepping towards her. Carefully. Who are you? Then he saw Milo's face had changed little, but she had grown taller. Someone who noticed that the engine to this car wasn't tuned properly. You are a cheeky little beggar, Tom began to say, and Milo stood upright. Cheeky implies out of place. I am not. I am telling you what's wrong with the engine and what you need to do to put it right, Milo went on, folding her arms. I am not a beggar. My father is a respectable. Oh, all right then. Show me, Tom Branson said, and Milo looked at the engine housing and pointed to where the manifold was screwed up too highly, using the fuel inefficiently. There is nothing wrong with this engine, girl, Branson told her, severely. Miss Ashby, Milo told him. Miss Ashby, Branson began, but fell silent as Milo's words came between them. It is strange, she said, that I have no mother, but you have two fathers. And it was true. It was strange as when she had heard it at the Inchiquin Castle, as when Baroness O'Brien told her grandmother one evening, will you get out of here and never come back? Branson's tone had changed to a roar and she began to stride across the flagstones of the garage. Close to her ear an object came flying. It was a spanner, and just missed the side of Milo's head, hitting the wooden garage doors with a thud. Milo looked at it, and then up at the figure coming towards them. It was Carson, who nodded to Milo, as she made to the electrical generator building. The chauffeur's cottage was next, and she would have to look at Ernest's plans for him. "You are required in the servants' hall," Carson told Branson, and Milo looked up as she crossed the courtyard, head in thoughts of electricity, and looked up as the two men passed beside her. 88,888,888. "You are in my way," Tom Branson told Milo the next day. Before the chauffeur's cottage Milo knelt, stones weighing down the plans of the building, copper spooling all over it as she made a plan as to where to begin. The gas had been isolated, Ernest had set the lamp fittings. All that needed doing was the lights to be connected in a circuit to the mains, which would be an easy job if someone was not in the way. Branson's shadow covered part of hers. Milo looked up. "You are in my way," she replied. And she was in his way. Milo thought, the car half out of the garage. In frustration, Branson strode away towards Downton Abbey and let himself into the kitchens. "Well, yes," Thomas safed, when he heard Tom Branson's complaint. "Isn't she supposed to be setting up the electrical circuits?" No reply. Branson's lips thinned but he said nothing. "So you were probably in her way." "But she was so rude," Tom declared, forcefully. Mrs. Batemore looked up from her pastry at his unusual sharp words. "Milo is direct, everyone knows that." "Same as I'm direct," Thomas said, taking up the trays. "You're rude," O'Brien told him. "Sometimes, it can be seen like it," Thomas said. "She says it as she sees it," Mrs. Hughes soothed the chauffeur, "and does not feel it necessary to waste words." So Tom Branson had a cup of tea and resentment found its tiny spark against me Lucina. 88,888,888. Summer wore on and Milo, when asked by her father, told him that she thought she had an exemplary record. "Ask Ernest," she urged him. "Ask Lord Grantham." "I believe you," Harold Ashby told Milo, then emptied his lungs of his cough. He gestured to the paper. "I am so glad you are back here with us." After this, he told his daughter. The picture was of the post office in Dublin, where the doors were being repaired. "It's been brewing for years." But that went over Milo's head. Politics she did not understand, technology, electricity, mechanical devices she did. And she was up a gas lamp, passing up wire on the driveway of Downton when she felt fluid in her trouser dress legs. Quickly, she hurried back to the electricity generator building to investigate, and that was where Thomas found her, hours later. "I'm hemorrhaging," Milo cried, eyes red from crying. She didn't want to die, but the blood would not stop coming. When Thomas did not reply, Milo clarified, "Bleeding to death." Then she saw a half smile on his lips. "No, Milo," Thomas said, his mind running through some facts. Though her mother was not alive and she lived with her father and her brother, had not her grandmother told her of this? "It happens to girls," Thomas said. "I had a big sister once and I don't know." Thomas shrugged. "My mother had a talk to her. And, I dunno." And Milo began to cry again, big, racking sobs. Thomas drew her to his shoulder. "Where?" he asked. But Milo didn't answer. "I'm dying," she declared. "You need to speak to someone, Mrs. Crawley perhaps?" "She was a nurse?" he suggested. No, please Thomas, find out for me. I'll wait." And Milo backed off and folded her arms. "Find out," Thomas thought to himself, and did what he always did when kind words and gentle solutions were needed. He brought Mrs. Hughes to the generator room. "Not me, but me Lucina," he told the housekeeper. "I think, a woman's thing?" Mrs. Hughes nodded. "She has no mother to explain everything. You did the right thing, Thomas." And she drew Milo out of the building to her protests. But she dashed back into the generator building as soon as Mrs. Hughes had let go of her arm. "Wait for her, you can walk her back home," she told Thomas. "I am going to bring her some things." Milo stood inside, waiting. "Not your father?" Mrs. Hughes asked when she returned. "Jug of water and change of bloomers." Milo looked at her, in horrified confusion. "No," Milo told her, "though now I come to think of it, my aunt might have said something to me, but I never really understood. I was up a lamppost in Wexford at the time and she was in the window of the castle." Mrs. Hughes looked at her in astonishment. "It was all right," Milo told her. "We had practice, my cousin and I. in Arklow, with gas lamps. "Tell me you are joking," Mrs. Hughes told her, as the happy memory that had filled Milo's mind faded and the horror of bleeding to death invaded her mind again. She shook her head. "Here," said Mrs. Hughes, "you need to take off your clothes, your trouserettes, and clean up. Then, in the new bloomer's place this rag. You will need to take it out when it is saturated, and wash it, cold water, mind you, and a bit of soap. Hang it out to dry. If there is some on your clothing, do the same thing. Not hot, mind, that will set the stain." And Mrs. Hughes went to join Mr. Barrow outside, where Thomas has begun a cigarette, as Milo washed and tidied herself. "Just tip the water away," Mrs. Hughes instructed, calling back into the generator building. "Outside is fine, by the other door." Milo handed Mrs. Hughes back the jug when she called through to tell her that she had done that. "It is horrifying," Milo told her. Mrs. Hughes sighed. "At least it will be over in a few days." "That's what my Aunt Helen said, I remember," Milo assured herself. "Yes, it will," Mrs. Hughes cautioned, "but next month it will come again, and then the next month." Milo opened her mouth in shock. "For how long?" "Many, many years," Mrs. Hughes sighed gravely. "It shows your body is ready for a baby." She lowered her head to Milo and whispered near her ear. "Avoid every man," she warned her. "That's impossible." "There's my brother, and father," she told the housekeeper. "Thomas is my friend, Lord Grantham is my friend, Mr. Carson is my friend." "Yes they are," Mrs. Hughes replied. "I meant, no young gentleman friends." Milo was thinking this through, linking it to her grandmother's advice. Unmarried men, Mary Jameson had told her granddaughter, but here was Mrs. Hughes telling her all men. "Stick with Thomas, he has always been your friend. Before you go back to your grandmother's." She followed Mrs. Hughes out of the generator room and smiled as Thomas inhaled on his cigarette. Mrs. Hughes patted her on the shoulder, relieving her of the water jug. And Thomas walked her home.